With the tampering period underway, the Bengals bring back one of their own and see two go to other teams. Let's get into what happened early on Monday and what's next for the Bengals.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. Free agency via the tampering period underway. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, bringing you coverage of your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe, hit the follow button anywhere you get your podcasts, and be notified when we upload our content. And you can join the First Listen Club with all the other Bengals fans out there making us their first listen. And the news is pretty simple for the Bengals, James, as the free agency tampering period has commenced. Germaine Pratt unexpectedly back with the Bengals. Vonn Bell unexpectedly departing to the other Queen City as he will join the Carolina Panthers in Charlotte. And Jessie Bates, as expected, going south to the Atlanta Falcons. And the Bengals continue to find ways to surprise us, James. Every year, it's a little bit different for the last 4 years in free agency. They've had a different surprise. It's always something. It's not something we're expecting. We haven't been able to catch on to the pattern yet. And this year, it's the return of Germaine Pratt.
Yeah, it's a surprise on the surface for sure. And I think it's a huge get. The fact that you're able to keep Pratt at a reasonable contract, a contract that feels like a bargain. It's kind of interesting. We talked about it, and you specifically mentioned on this show, a lot of their 3-year deals are 2-year deals, and we were referring to Vonn Bell, and that's what this is for Pratt. But hopefully he balls out and plays for 3 years and is able to see the life of that deal. But I don't think it prevents them from keeping Logan Wilson, and that's the beauty of this deal. And going into free agency, I think a lot of people expected Germaine Pratt to have a bigger market. I think he expected himself to have more suitors at higher numbers. And I think the Bengals did too. I don't think we were off. I don't think we were wrong, but I think the logic made sense that, Pratt is going to get more than the Bengals are willing to pay. And then he hit the market. And I think his agent was calling the Bengals back like, hey, we would love to come back. and the Bengals, obviously gave him a team-friendly deal. So that was certainly a surprise, but a welcome surprise. And I think that Lou Anarumo, as tough as Monday probably was for him, losing Vonn Bell, losing Jessie Bates, you feel pretty good about keeping 57 around.
It's such a weird year for linebackers. You have the mega deal for Tremaine Edmonds, the 4 years, $72 million from the Bears, who also signed TJ Edwards, who is arguably a top 10 linebacker as an undrafted free agent coming up in Philly for 3 years, $19.5 million. And the only other deal bigger than Germaine Pratt's on a per-year basis is Bobby Okereke, who signed with the New York Giants for 4 years, $10 million a year, up to $10 million a year, I guess. We don't know the exact numbers yet. Reported at 4 years, $40 million. And Germaine Pratt at 3 years, $7 million a year for Pratt. And that's about the number where we said if it's $7 million a year,
sure,
that's pretty comfortable. And it doesn't necessarily, like you said, put extending Logan Wilson out of reach. $7 million a year is not a ton to spend, but the general interior linebacker, off-ball linebacker, whatever you want to call it, market, not pass rushing linebacker market, pretty $6 million. $6 million everywhere. Alex Singleton, 3 years, $18 million. Quincy Williams, 3 years, $18 million. Alex Anzalone, 3 years, just under $19 million. So 6 and change and $6 million. TJ Edwards even 6 and change is a standard. And David Long, who I thought would have a bigger market, 2 years, $5.5 million a year. So the market didn't materialize for these off-ball linebackers. And I think that's a big part of why Germaine Pratt is back. And we still don't have the money on Vonn Bell either. But James, I mean, I was half joking when I said this, but what do you think the odds are that the Bengals had one deal written up, 3 years, $7 million a year, offered it to Vonn Bell? He said, I can get more from Carolina. The Bengals said, okay, see you later, Vonn. It's been a pleasure. We'll talk more about the departures of the safeties, and then turned around and said, hey, Germaine, we got a 3-year, $21 million deal here for you. I mean, that would be so Bengals, right? That's what they tend to do.
Yeah, I think that they were going to keep one of them, and I think they still would have preferred probably to keep Vonn to have some continuity in that safety room. But I think early on they realized they were out based on what I've heard after the fact. And there were multiple suitors for Vonn Bell. He did have that market that we discussed, that if he had, like, this is the path. This is the path to keeping Pratt and losing Vonn. Is one guy had a huge market compared to what we were thinking. I know the Dolphins, from what I heard, were in on him. The Panthers, obviously the Bengals wanted to keep him. That did not change. But I don't think that Pratt had the market he was hoping for. And so when you mix that together, it's one of those things where the Bengals, they weighed it and they said, all right, let's keep Pratt. And part of that might have had to do with not being able to keep Bell at their number. Who knows what they offered Bell? I don't know exactly. Did they do a similar 3-year deal, $21 million? Did they offer him what he got a few years ago, 3 years, 18? I'm not sure. But I agree with you. I don't think that there was a realistic path, at least, to keeping Bell and Pratt long term. And so that they were able to keep one of them. And that's good, because the last thing you wanted was to look at Lou and say, all right, you're going to figure out this linebacker issue. You're also going to have to figure out both safety spots. Obviously, one of those goes to Dax Hill, and we'll talk about it. But that's just a lot to absorb. You're going to lose some pieces. And instead of losing all three, you lose two. So we can dive into the safeties. But I agree with you. I think that the Bengals, they wanted to keep one, and they kept one at a reasonable salary, no doubt.
This is their MO in a number of ways. If you talk about business as usual for the Cincinnati Bengals, what are the things that are typical about this deal? One, a second contract instead of a third contract. The younger player got paid. And two, I think they found a market here that is depressed. For whatever reason, linebackers are not getting paid today. They didn't get paid on Monday. 2 got paid, the rest of them in the $6-7 million range. 5.5 for David Long, who was really good. Like, really good last year. Incredible deal for Miami, to be honest. But the Bengals identify it and they say, okay, we can go to a $7 million deal here for a player that we have a very specific role for, who does a lot of things for us, who aligns on the edge in our 5-man surfaces, who can go play man from time to time and can man up. You know, running backs can man up some tight ends, although they did take him off the field on third downs on clear passing downs. Was a good run defender, got better every year with the Bengals. These are things that make a lot of sense in that context. It was just the way that, you know, the social media presence went and everything. It seemed like Pratt was going to be the one of these 2 guys to go. And it didn't work out that way, which is why it's surprising. But when you take a step back, and now that it's happened in hindsight, you look at all these things that make it typical for the Bengals. Maybe it shouldn't be as surprising as it ends up being.
Well, I think he's surprised too, probably. I mean, just based on that social media, like you said, I just think he thought he was going to have more of a market. Mm-hmm. And the Bengals probably had a number in mind for Pratt. And of course they wanted him. They wanted all these guys back. They wanted Bates back and Bell back, but at their number. And Pratt was the guy who hit the market and realized, hey, I'm going to go get that number. And that's where it was. And so you're right. He brings a lot of experience, continuity, all of those things that we talk about with any of these guys that have returned or that, you know, developed and are returning for 2023. But he's also a guy that's, you know, taken part in so many big plays, right? You talk about the interception against the Raiders, the fumble that he forced against Travis Kelce against the Chiefs in game 1 this year at Paycor Stadium. A lot of big moments. So it's cool to see him continue to build that. And I'm glad, because I thought his Bengals tenure was going to come to an end, and instead it's continuing. So it's a sad day on one hand with the guys we're about to talk about, but it's certainly an exciting day for Germaine Pratt. And what do you say we dive into some of those other guys? Vonn Bell, Jessie Bates, they're gone. Both going to the NFC South. I don't know if anybody had the FanDuel odds on that, but we'll dive into that coming up next. And speaking of FanDuel, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point and really the end of the NBA season is almost here. And what that means is it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So whether you want to have a same game parlay where you're combining the number of rebounds and points Anthony Davis gets with Julius Randle's points. Did you see that the other night? The Knicks edging out the Lakers. You can wager in a bunch of different ways with FanDuel and get that no sweat first bet. So don't miss your chance to get in on the action right now and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Speaking of big plays, James, you're talking about all the big plays that Germaine Pratt was involved in, has been involved in. He continues to be part of the Cincinnati Bengals, obviously. Jessie Bates and Vonn Bell both had their fair share of momentous plays in their Bengals career as well. And Vonn Bell in particular, I feel like the amount of clutch plays, not to say that Jessie doesn't have these as well, but the amount of clutch plays from Vonn Bell really stand out. The work ethic that you always heard about with Vonn Bell, first into the building so often, the leadership from both of these guys and bringing that secondary together and getting those secondary extra work sessions in. There is a void here that the Bengals now have to fill in their secondary. And while there, I think, is an argument that perhaps what the Bengals asked Germaine Pratt to do is harder to replace directly with one single player than what the Bengals asked Vonn Bell to do, I think that that's a little bit close. And you know, both of those guys are good players, but Jessie Bates departing as expected, just weren't expecting to see the Bengals also lose Vonn Bell. As Lou Anarumo said at the Combine, wasn't, you know, it will be a dark day if the Bengals lose both of those guys. I think that speaks to what their plans were. And unfortunately, the Bengals lose both guys.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to lose both guys. And Lou Anarumo describing it, it's going to be a dark day if that happens. It's tough because the continuity part, the leadership part, all of those things. But the best of the two guys was leaving before today, and we knew it. And I think it's tough because a lot of people just kind of thought, probably partially my fault and our fault and everybody's fault, that said, oh, well, they're going to go after Vonn Bell. Well, yeah, they did. I know they did. I know they valued him. But they might have said, you know what? This is one of those positions that we should be really young at because we're going to spend at corner over the next few years, or we're going to spend at receiver, of course, quarterback, of course. They're picking the positions they're really going to spend at. And they might have looked at safety and said, we're not going to spend more than this. And we're going to find a veteran that can fill in for Bell and roll with Dax Hill and Tyson Anderson and Michael Thomas, by the way, who they re-signed to a one-year deal. And that's going to make up our safety room. And that might have been their logic. By the way, they re-signed Michael Thomas before the start of free agency. I don't really think he's going to play a lot of safety. Obviously, he's a key special teamer. But it is it's a big loss. And losing Bell, we'll see what they do. We can get into some of the options that they have in replacing him. But it stinks. It stinks because on one hand, you have a guy in Bates who's 26 that they drafted and developed, and he's one of the better safeties in the league. Like, that's not debatable. And on the other hand, they stumbled into Vonn Bell in 2020 when they were a bad team going nowhere, it felt like. And he was part of the Trey Waynes, DJ Reader, Vonn Bell free agency haul. And boy, oh boy, did they hit it out of the park with Reader and Bell. And Bell was like this diamond in the rough that they added, and it paid off, whether it was the hit on Juju Smith-Schuster or the interceptions earlier this year, is playing the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs at Arrowhead. Like, Vonn Bell made big plays. And so it's going to stink to watch him, you know, playing Carolina with another young quarterback. We'll see who they draft there. But we talked about that. A young team that could value what he brings to the table. I get it. I understand wanting him. And I understand why a team like the Panthers did what they needed to do to bring him in.
Yeah. I'm going to be very curious to see the money.
I haven't seen it either. That's what's weird. Is it's still not out. The money for everybody is out there, and the money for Bell is not. It's weird.
I think that's like, well, Brandon Faison, we don't have money yet for either, but that's way down the list of cornerbacks that signed today. There's a few that we don't have, but that Vonn Bell deal is, I think, the biggest deal that's been announced that we don't have money for yet, at least as far as I know. And a lot of them, you're right, they were announced with the money right away. But it is interesting when you look at the safety market on the whole, James, because the Bengals obviously, Dax Hill is going to step in and be one of their starting safeties next year, and they're going to need another one. Still a lot of guys out there. The only safeties that have signed are Vonn Bell and Jessie Bates, and then Marcus Epps and Tashawn Gibson. And Tashawn Gibson re-signed with the 49ers. Marcus Epps goes to the Raiders on a 2-year, $6 million a year deal. But the safety market hasn't really taken off. And I think I mentioned before today that it's a relatively deep free agent class at safety, whether it's the top of market guys like Jordan Poyer or Chauncey Gardner-Johnson or Juan Thornhill, who we've talked about a lot, or the released John Johnson, who was on the Chargers radar, according to reports on Monday. And, maybe the Bengals aren't in on these guys. Maybe they are. But it's interesting when you look at free agency and you look at the markets that haven't developed. A bunch of linebackers signed today, but for cheap, which is kind of weird because a bunch of them signed, but not for big deals. Jamel Dean didn't get the kind of market he was expecting, goes back to Tampa Bay on a relatively affordable deal for a player of his stature. But, you can also look at tight end. None of those top tight ends signed today. The bottom of the tight end market, Josh Oliver went out and signed a 3-year, $21 million deal to go be a blocking tight end for Minnesota. Jonnu Smith got traded. But, the top of that tight end market, nothing happened. The wide receiver market, nothing happened. The running back market, nothing happened. More.
You know what you're doing? You're setting us up to get jinxed to hell and back between the time that we finish recording and the time that we post this episode.
Well, neither of us have anything to do tonight, right? I'm not going to a class and you're not on vacation.
That's right. Yeah. I'm we'll see. We'll see what happens. But no, I agree. It's weird. Well, not weird. It's unique. And I think that's the part of it that I tweeted relax because people freaked out. And they should, I get it. I get freaking out because Bates and Bell are both gone. But the Bengals are looking at the big picture still. Mm-hmm. And it's not just safety. It's, this running back class, free agent class is falling down. And we know about the rumblings about the Jamal Williams interest. Who knows? And who knows if they were in on Patrick Peterson, right? Maybe they were with a 1-year deal and the Steelers offered him 2. But they're looking at all these different positions. It's not just one spot. Oh, we got to fill the safety role now. Maybe they do with a veteran, and I think they ultimately will.
I do too.
But they're looking at this market like, all right, let's just breathe. Hayden Hurst is a good example last year. Uzama left, and it was like, oh, what are they going to do? And then Conklin, and there was rumored interest in him. And then the chips fell, and they got Hayden Hurst. And I don't think it might take that long. It might not take that long to land a safety. But I think that's kind of what they're doing. They're letting the market play out. They probably have a pocket of guys that they like, and they're going to try to land one of those guys. And maybe it's Monday night, maybe it's Tuesday morning, maybe it's Wednesday morning. But I think that they're confident that they can do that.
I think safety is something that I'm watching now. I don't know that they're going to want to go into the draft needing a guy. I don't know that they're going to be comfortable with the guys they have on the roster. And so that's something that I'm certainly keeping an eye on is the safety position. By the way, just as an aside, Jessie Bates, $16 million APY average per year does qualify him to be a third-round compensatory pick.
Look
just
at you.
On that bubble.
Look at you.
So as the Bengals have lost a couple guys now and brought back Germaine Pratt, it's just something that we're going to keep an eye on, right? Because if they can keep that third-round pick, maybe that's the only comp pick they get because they're going to lose some other guys, most likely. Maybe they only get one. But if you're in line for a third, that's something else to watch, I think, as free agency develops as far as what kind of deals they end up going for down the road here. And they've already shown that, the market they want to continue to play in is the same as we've seen from them the last few years, which is kind of that mid-tier market. That $7 million to $10 million market is probably the top end of where they want to play, I would assume.
Yeah. We'll see exactly what they do. Let's continue this conversation. I have a thought on offensive line, and we can discuss that and more coming up next. Today's show, though, is brought to you by Built Bar, the #1 protein bar on the planet. And the Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now it's time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know I'm going to be voting for the mint chocolate. I love the mint chocolate Built Bar, and that's one of my go-tos. I think Jake is more of a coconut puff guy. The point is, though, is you can vote right now, and all you have to do is go to builtmarchmadness.com. And when you vote for your favorite Built Bar or puff, you're going to be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built Bars. Free! Think about that. I'm going to try to vote 50,000 times so I can get this free box, and you should try it too. And not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built and have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, high protein, low sugar, low calorie. So grab one today and go to builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box when you're there. Or you can vote every day in March. So hop in and support your pick. I'm going to vote right after we're done with the show. Again, builtmarchmadness.com.
All right, James, you have a thought for me about the offensive line? What are you thinking? Who are they going to sign?
What? Not that, but everyone's freaking out about safety. What if they said F those safeties and they were just really pursuing Germaine Pratt, right? And they were like, I'm going to get this right tackle position solved. And that's it. And, would anyone be mad at that? And they're like, safety's running slow. Offensive line's hot. McGlinchey got Built Bars and Built Bars worth of money. I mean, geez, Pete, what Mike McGlinchey got was insane. The Chiefs, I think that's a risk, by the way. What they're doing. Let's sign a right tackle and move him to left tackle because it sort of worked with Orlando Brown because we don't really love Orlando Brown, but we want a long-term answer. All right. Was Jawan Taylor that? I don't know. So that's scary to me. And so we'll see what the Bengals do. And by the way, I guarantee you the Bengals looked at that and they're like, really? That's what you're doing? So we'll see what they do offensive line wise, but don't think we forgot about the offensive line. That's certainly a big part of what they need to do.
And we're not Locked On Chiefs, so I'm not going to defend the Jawan Taylor signing too much. 4 years, $80 million for Jawan Taylor to go play left tackle. As soon as we saw the money, I was in a Twitter Spaces at the time, and I was like, well, that's not right tackle money, right? That's got to be left tackle money. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, they're asking him to play left tackle. They do have a great offensive line coach in Kansas City. They have a great quarterback that's going to make blocking easy for the left tackle, the new left tackle, the Kansas City Chiefs, and Jawan Taylor, but we'll see how that deal goes. Mm-hmm. Young player, plays a lot, hasn't missed much time in the NFL. There are things to like about it for sure. But how about the Chiefs and 49ers? 49ers splashing 4 years, $80 million on Hargrave. Chiefs, 4 years, $80 million on Taylor. These, Super Bowl and Final Four teams making big moves. The Eagles, meanwhile, losing their entire defense.
My God.
And the Bengals losing their two safeties. Speaking of the rest of the Final Four teams and focusing on the Bengals, it is interesting to think about what the Bengals are doing on the offensive line. If it is Germaine Pratt, great. I think we've talked about that he's represented by Mulligetta on this podcast.
There you go.
I also mentioned earlier, at some point the Bengals have to figure out how to work with this guy. He's going to continue to grow his clientele base because he continues to get what his clients want. And he also represents T. Higgins. So, the Bengals have to figure out how to get contracts done with David Mulligetta. Maybe Germaine Pratt is a possibility for that. You look at some of the tackle deals that have been signed. Andre Dillard, former first-round pick, right? Goes the Tennessee Titans 3 years, just under $30 million, just under $10 million a year.
Wild. By the way,
Wiley,
Tennessee, desperate.
I mean, the draft pedigree really just. Look at the TJ Evers deal for another example in the other direction of draft pedigree really sticking with guys. Yeah. Andrew Wiley signs a 3 year, $24 million deal, so $8 million a year, just under $10 million a year for Dillard. Does that mean that it's 8, 9 million?
I like Wiley better. Right? Is it 8 to 9 for Illuminor? It probably is. And so do the Bengals. Are they even in that? They might not.
I wonder. Maybe. Depends on how badly they feel they need a right tackle.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at this interior defensive line market somewhere. I mean, it's not been cheap. That's not why I say that, but it just
Calais Campbell.
I wouldn't say no.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to break that bank at 36.
He's still good.
Last year.
We were talking about that in this space earlier today too. I think he's still good.
I'd be in.
He was cut.
Oh yeah. Look at Jake. Jake's like, give me some John Johnson.
John Johnson and Calais Campbell. Let's go.
Calais Campbell and boom, let's cook, baby, because it doesn't impact the comp picks for those wondering. It's going to be fun. Don't panic, Bengals fans. That one's. Mm-hmm. I want that to be the message. Don't panic yet. It's there's a long way to go, and maybe there's a time to panic. Maybe that's what happens, but let's just let this play out.
When is the time to panic? Like panic? I'm not panicking over free agency right now with the way this team is constructed and how important their offense is. If they get to the season and they don't, if they get through free agency in the draft, they don't have a right tackle that makes a lot of sense, and they don't have a safety that makes a lot of sense, then you're a little worried about that, or maybe a lot worried about that. Safeties, though, I mean, tons of those guys still available.
The time to panic could happen. I don't think we're close to it. That's all.
It could.
Yeah. Look at you analyzing when the time is to panic. The answer is not now. That's all. It's not now. And we don't need to go down the dark path of panicking.
Yeah. But, there are some deals out there that you like that the Bengals, Ogo or Okoronkwo with Cleveland, 3 years, $22 million. Maybe you wanted the Bengals to be in on Okoronkwo. David Onyemata with the Falcons, 3 years, $24 million. Maybe you wanted the Bengals to be in on Onyemata. There are some guys out there that, sign some deals that make sense. And Jessie Bates, 4 years, 64. The Bengals couldn't get that done last year. It probably comes down to guaranteed money there. But
$23 million in year one, $36 million through 2 years. Nah.
But the Bengals aren't bad at that part of it. The Bengals are pretty good at getting the cash flow going in the first 2 years. It's the guarantees. And so we don't know the guarantees yet. But that's where the Bengals are. Like I said, and I agree with you, James. Tons of safeties out there. Nothing to panic about yet at the safety position. We tried to prepare you for the Bengals not being in on Mike McGlinchey, Jawan Taylor, Orlando Brown, that level of tackle.
But is Brown gone? He's still out there, right?
He's still out there, but I mean,
never know.
I'm not changing my tune about
that
at this point. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I expected from day one. Not the players. Like I thought Bell would be back and Pratt would be gone. That's the thing that's different. But outside of that, nothing terribly surprising to me so far.
Nope. No, I think we'll see. TBD. Yep. But don't panic, breathe, and know that we have you covered.
Yeah, and as more does develop on the free agency front, we will have you covered here on Locked On Bengals. We'll have updates and analysis for you as soon as we can every day as we get through this free agency period. And until next time, we appreciate you listening. Have fun watching Twitter for those rumors. Try to avoid those fake rumor accounts. They'll do you no good. And we'll talk to you next time here on Locked On Bengals. Until then, hoo-day, and have a good one.